Hello, everyone. The title of this article is Washington's Cherry Trees Were the Object of World War II Protests. Today, the cherry trees are beloved in Washington, D.C. Each year, their blooms mark the return of spring. They are planted around an area called the Tidal Basin. They weren't always so loved. On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack led the United States entry into World War II. Residents were infuriated. They suddenly saw the forest with its Japanese trees as a target. Early in the morning of December 10th, the lights near the tidal basin were switched off. Someone crept onto the mall and cut down four of the Yoshino cherry trees. Two had been part of the original group from Japan planted in 1912. The cutters were quiet. It seemed they sawed by hand. An anti-Japanese saying was written on one of the stumps. Japan was once a friend to D.C., now it was the enemy. Franklin D. Roosevelt had declared war on Japan 2 days earlier. The Freer Gallery had large collections of Japanese art. After Pearl Harbor, museum workers quickly hid them to protect them. Local dance bands stopped playing the popular song Japanese Sadman. Japan's mark is taboo, read the headline of a story, the Washington Post from December 10th. Shelves were emptied of Japanese products. At many stores, Japanese products were pulled from the shelves or reported. Some sellers were criticized for displaying Japanese goods. The story said, however, they turned out to be made in China. But nothing was more Japanese in the 1940s Washington than its acres of cherry trees. The trees had become deeply a part of the city's identity. In 1937, residents heard that many cherry trees would be removed to make room for the planned Jefferson Memorial. This caused a full-on rebellion. Women, many of them gardeners, grabbed tools from the construction workers. They pitched dirt into the holes. The women backtalked fiercely, according to a National Park Service story. Some of them chained themselves to the trunks to protect the bulldozers. Roosevelt promised that the trees would be transplanted instead of destroyed. The standoff ended. However, just 4 years later, Washingtonians were cutting the trees down. Vandalism in Japan towns. It was part of an early and building wave of anti-Japanese vandalism throughout the country. California, Oregon, and other areas had large populations of Japanese Americans. There, Buddhist temples and grocery stores were attacked. Buddhism is a religion followed by many in Japan. In Washington, the streets were targets. The trees were targets. If you don't have a Japan town, you lash out at the symbol instead, said Jason of Petrulis. Petrulis is a historian of University of Hong Kong. Government officials criticized the tree cutting. Irving Root helped lead the National Capital Park. Not everyone objected. National writer Jack Stinnett reported that many wanted the trees to be torn up by the roots. Government officials resisted. Still, for the next several years, they referred to the grove as Oriental cherry trees rather than Japanese. It must have seemed wise back then. That month, Life magazine published a guide to telling Japanese from people apart from Chinese. In their view, the Japanese were supposedly short and squat. Meanwhile, Chinese were tall and slender, among other false descriptions. They had to figure out how to help Americans see that all Asians are not the enemy, Petruis said. Still, people in power made up stories and handed out materials that made the Japanese seem like villains. This led to all kinds of twisted reasoning. Petrulis added, it was a tense time. Soon the war was over. Fortunately, it didn't take long for Washingtonians to fall back in love with its signature trees. The Cherry Blossom Festival had been canceled for 5 springs. It returned in 1947. About 450,000 citizens came back to see their trees. So the quiz, question 1. Read the section Vandalism in Japan Towns. Which sentence explains why people attacked parts of Japanese culture? And this is vandalism in Japan towns. And the answer is D. If you don't have a Japan town, you lash out at the symbol instead, meaning they lashed out the cherry trees. The next question. Read the paragraph below from the section Shelves were emptied of Japanese products. Women, many of them gardeners, grabbed tools from the construction workers. They pitched dirt into the holes. The women backtalked fiercely, according to a National Park Service story. Some of them chained themselves to the trunks to protest the bulldozers. What inference can the reader make based on this paragraph? And that paragraph is from Shelves were emptied of Japanese products. And the answer is A. Not everyone agreed with removing the cherry trees because some women didn't want it removed. The next question, what is the structure of this article? And it is cause and effect. And the final question, read the paragraph below. What does the paragraph do in this section?